I'll start by letting all of our panelists introduce themselves and tell us what they do. So, Venkat, do you want to start?
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone who has joined. My name is Venkat Subramaniam. I'm a programmer, author, consultant. I travel around the world when it's possible and do training, consulting, and mentoring. I live here near Denver, Colorado, but I'm also a faculty at the University of Houston where I teach remotely. Thank you.
Cool. Adobe, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Adobe Obi Tolton, and I am a project editor for Pragmatic Programmers, and I've been involved in editing tech books for about 20 years now. So it's kind of amazes me when I think about that. And I've worked with many different topics, from Python to even skills such as security. So, and I've been doing it for a while, and I've come to enjoy it for over time. So yeah.
Thank you. Rachel?
Hey, I am Rachel Neighbors. I have been in the front-end development community for about a decade, and just a few years ago published my first tech book. But before then, I used to self-publish my own graphic novels in my first career as a cartoonist. Now I bring those same skills to my technical writing on the React organization, where I work on React Native and React Core docs. I'm happy to talk about open source documentation as a team effort and other similar things.
Thank you very much. And Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Rankin. I'm a software developer. I'm the co-owner of a software development consulting company. I am the executive editor at the Pragmatic Bookshelf, sometimes development editor at the Bookshelf, and then also technical editor and author, not of books, but of online tutorials and shorter format pieces from time to time.
Thank you very much. We unfortunately don't have Erica on the panel today. She isn't feeling very well, so I do send my regards and hope that she feels better soon, and we will miss her. So Dave, please pass that message on. And so one question that we received was people were interested to know how you got to where you are today. So we'd love to hear a bit about your journey, and maybe if there's any education, self-taught, and yeah, your journey. So let's start with you again, Venkat.
One answer would be sheer dumb luck, but more honest answer is, I say it's pure desperation. I really wanted to tell my stories, and that's kind of what started me. Working as a software developer, programmer, consultant, you have a certain reach when you speak in conferences. You have a certain reach when you go teach a course. But I really wanted to reach a broader set of audience. And secondly, I had some amazing influence. Speaking shoulder to shoulder with folks like Dave Thomas, the pragmatic programmer, really opened my eyes to the part of my life that I never experienced, which is the journey of being an author. So I had a lot of inspirations around me, and that's kind of what really led, but a lot of hard work and inspiration from people is what I would say.
Thank you. Rachel?
Oh, great. That's really inspiring. I love what you said about telling your story. I similarly was really big on traveling and speaking, speaking on conference stages, but you can only reach so many people, like a few hundred people at a time. I made courses and I met even more people through doing that. But in the end, you really, publishing an actual article or tutorial online can reach so many people. It's such a scaling way of sharing knowledge. I got started in technical writing way back when I worked with MDN to document the web animations API. I was working with the W3C as an invited expert on that API, And I was also a freelancer, and MDN said, you do really cool demos in your talks. Why don't you do the documentation for the API too? And it seemed like the perfect intersection of everything I loved. Cool demo illustrations, API I'm working on, MDN who I adore. And since then, I found out that I'm actually really good at writing technical documentation, and people will pay me to do that. And I really enjoy the ability to teach so many people at scale. So that was the short story. I'm going to leave room for other people's stories.
Thank you very much. Adobe?
Okay, so I'm going to echo what Venkat said, and that it really was sheer dumb luck. I was in college and I was a bio major, and it just wasn't working out very well, but I had enough credits to go for an English major, but I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going to do with it. In my senior year, I was walking around the college building, and I literally found a flyer on the floor that said, are you interested in publishing? Would you like to pursue this as a career? So that just sort of lit a fire in me, because I had been interested in publishing, but I hadn't thought about it as a viable career. I just thought of it as some hobby, because I read a lot, and I was always trying to fix errors in books that I read, things like that. So I decided to go and do an internship. So I did an internship at HarperCollins. And then following that, I got my first job working as a manuscript coordinator for the journal Cell Biology for Rockefeller University. But in order to advance past that, of course, you would need a PhD in bio or something like that. So I wasn't willing to go that far. So I went and looked for other positions, and I got my first job working at Wiley in their computer books division. And I've been working in programming books ever since then. I wouldn't say that it was my first choice, because I had this idea of working with all these fiction writers and reading novels all the time. But after a while, I realized that a lot of the skills required for that also apply to working with technical authors. They also need help with just keeping all the content together, keeping everything organized, really speaking to their audience. So just working with all the authors has been, I think, one of the most rewarding things for me, just being in publishing in general, and then working with technical writers as well.
Cool, thank you very much. And Dave?
I was trying to think about, when I was listening to everyone, to answer the question about a journey, because I was thinking, where am I to say, what would that journey even be? Where did it start and where did it end? Or where am I now? And I guess I'm not entirely sure. I guess really it's the journey for me is two things. It's because they've always kind of been somewhat separate, and only more recently in the last 3 years converged. Where for a long time it was software development. For me, programming, I think like a lot of people my age, started just as a hobby, in the 80s, learning Turbo Pascal and BASIC at home, because that's what I had access to and doing. So like I grew up with this kind of love of programming and an interest in it. But it's not immediately what I went to school for. I actually went off to the university to study German and English. And then even later on, what I went to grad school for was cultural studies and critical theory. I actually thought I was going in that direction. I thought I was going to be much more of a straight up like academic, probably working in some English lit department or something like that. But all along, I was, teaching myself more and more programming. I had my sister actually started up a small local internet service provider. They hired me on, they trained me on networking and different things. And so I kind of had this informal technical education going on, which I then, after doing the degree programs in English and German and philosophy, I then went into computer science. And so I kind of came out of it thinking, well, I don't know what to do. I've got this whole big pile of degrees and things, and where am I going to go with this? And I went into software development is what I did. But I always had this kind of love of what I learned in terms of critical theory and critical thinking. And so editorial stuff kind of became a natural fit. I had taught writing at different times at the university level. And, you know, so that part kept coming up, where instead of writing, I was helping other software developers who were, you know, maybe they were writing documentation on a project, or maybe it was just blog posts or a short format thing. And eventually that led to a job with the New York Times. They wanted to start a whole new section where they were going to write about open source technologies. And at that time I was working a lot and contributing to a lot of different open source projects. And I think my writing background kind of made sense. So they brought me on to not only write content, but also edit other people's content. And then I really was hooked at that point. I really liked doing it professionally. So I kept finding ways, even as a software developer, to either write more on my own, anywhere that anybody would publish anything I wrote, or also do editorial work anywhere that I could. DigitalOcean hired me to be a technical editor, and I did that, and eventually came to you know, the Pragmatic Bookshelf, where I was working on books. And the whole thing kind of came together there in terms of having a background in software development and editing and writing. And I guess that's how I got to where I am now, which I'd like to think is not the end of the journey, just where I am right now in terms of it. And ask me again in a year, and I hope to have much more to tell you.
Nice. Thank you very much. So we've started having questions come in, which is nice because it means that I don't have to use mine, because these ones are way more exciting. Someone has said, what advice do you have for someone who has never written something, in quotes, technical before? So I'm going to change this slightly, so it could be a blog post or a book. What advice do you have for someone just starting out? And that can be for anyone.
I'll take that. So one of the things we often find quite intimidating is that leap from where we are to what we want to see as a result. And that's a huge journey. And I think most of us cannot really envision that. You know, I'm currently sitting and writing, you know, in fact, just a few minutes before I joined this meeting, I was typing away my 12th book. And it is as painful writing the 12th one as it was the first one. And the part of the reason for that is, you know, as person who is writing, we have everything in our head, but we have to really distill it down in a deltas that somebody can actually understand and make use of it. So my two recommendations I would give are, one, just start somewhere. You know, I can't tell you how many times I would sit at a desk and spend 3 hours and have written 2 sentences and I'm scolding myself. But it's really important to just get that first draft out. And once you get something on paper or you know, on the computer screen, you can come back and revise it and improve it so many ways. And the second lesson I've learned over and over, now that I've followed it thoroughly, is never start with the introduction. That's the worst thing to do. It's really discouraging when you start with introduction, because, you know, a lot of ways you want to really get to the end and step back and talk about what you really want to say in the book or the article. And maybe I'll just add one more thing is, if you're not throwing away significant part of what you're writing, you're not really doing a good job yet. It's kind of like the films. You know, movies, they don't release everything they make. You can imagine how much time and effort they put into make all these scenes that never makes into a movie. Well, writing is a lot like that. There have been chapters I never released in some of my books, and I'm not regretting at all not writing them, because those are really part of what we do. We need to be, you know, involved in it and have the courage to write it and then rewrite it. I think that's very critical.
It's a bit like when you're writing code as well, isn't it? Like, you know, write code, you know, and particularly when people are learning, you know, like go back in 3 months and look at that code again. Because I always tell people, like, you will always think of like how you could do it better. So like, don't be precious about it, basically. Anyone else?
I have some ideas. The question was where to start, where to get started in tech writing. I was going to just say Venkat has a great suggestion there with never start with the intro. It was the last part of the book that I wrote on UI animation, and it was the hardest part because it was the worst. And there's no way I could have started that book writing the introduction. But if you're thinking, man, I really want to go out there and share some of my technical knowledge, but I'm super sheepish, try explaining or sharing something you've done, like that one weird trick that really helped you, and just posting it on Medium or someplace where you won't feel too self-conscious. People's feedback and thumbs up will encourage you, and you might want to share more. If you feel a little bolder, maybe you should check out some of your favorite lesser-known open source projects, which often suffer from very poor documentation. If you're very familiar with the API, but the documentation is lacking reference pages for each of the properties and methods that you reference every day, get in touch with the maintainers and ask if you can help fill out those edges. That's a really useful thing, and the maintainers are so grateful to have somebody willing to tackle documenting that for other people.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
I just wanted to follow up because I really like what Rachel was saying too about the idea of, those were two different ways of writing. And as someone who works for a company that publishes books, I probably shouldn't say this, but there's so many different ways to write about these topics. And sometimes I talk with new authors that have only tried one thing, right? They wrote some documentation and they were like, yeah, it turns out that this isn't for me. And you go, well, you start talking with them and you realize, oh, you would have been fantastic at writing a blog post, or, oh, you would have been great at doing something much longer like a book. So the other thing I would say is if people try something because they think that writing about technology is something for them, sometimes it's actually the format that, the first format they try might not have been the right fit for them. And so if they thought they would like it, they try it, they're like, it's not for me, don't give up there. Try some other formats, look around, see what else there is, because that could actually have been what it was. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, what everyone else said is sometimes people look at other works and they think that's the way they're supposed to write. Is that you write the way that feels comfortable to you. If you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you're not going to speak in someone else's voice. So use your own voice. And you can work on editing it all out later, but write the way that you would speak to somebody else. And that would make it much easier for you because you're not trying to fish for words and not trying to come up with a way to describe something, because you're speaking it the way that works best for you.
Thank you. Anything else before we move on to the next question? Cool, thank you very much. What do you pay attention to when you edit your articles? Is the next question, and again, open to anyone.
Well, I guess since I am primarily the editor, one of the things I look for is flow. I want to make sure that everything leads into something else. Sometimes when you're an expert in a field, you may think in your head, oh, I know this part, and then you're just writing along, but you forget that the person that you're writing for is learning all of this stuff. So there may be steps in there that you might have not addressed because you're already thinking in your head that this happened already. They don't know what that thing that was supposed to happen has happened yet. So I read in terms of in making sure that every step is provided, making sure that if there's something there that a reader might not have encountered yet, I'll put in a query and say, hey, do you think that the reader might know what this is? And if they don't know what it is, could you explain it? So So yeah, flow, organization, and then sometimes things might sound a little awkward because yeah, as a writer right now, all you're doing is just throwing your ideas down on paper. So I'll check and just make sure that the idea actually makes sense.
Thank you.
So those kinds of things, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very useful. Anyone else?
I've got one. So two things I just thought of, one of which is introducing concepts that might seem familiar to you and to the people that you know. React Native documentation struggles with this a lot because we're writing for 4 different audiences: people with no programming background, people with web development background, people with iOS programming background, and people with Android programming background. And they all have different models, different use cases, and different grammars and vocabularies for expressing very similar concepts. One of my tricks is to go into the drafts and be like, this is an interesting word. Do you think you could break it down for me? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I really don't. And that has been one of the bigger challenges. I often will take pieces of writing past multiple tech reviewers and watch them trip on each other's words until we've all broken everything down into explanations that make sense to these different audiences. It's a unique challenge, but it does change the way you approach looking at a technical piece. And one other trick, which I actually got from reviewing people's slides at large companies, people have a tendency to reference people they know as cited experts, but often we have a bias to reference people who are a lot like us. Whenever I see a lot of references called out or subject matter experts called out, I look to see if these people are all one particular kind of person, and I'll come back to the author and say, hey, can you expand who you're pulling from here? Maybe quote some people from different backgrounds, different countries even, let's try to expand the table here because experts come from all over the world, and we certainly shouldn't be limiting who we're referencing to just our inner circle of friends. So those are 2 things that I look for when I'm running through my own articles as well as other people's.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to input?
Something else I would say too is, and only because, so on my end of things, I end up talking with a lot of, so I work a lot in acquisition. So a lot of times it's people who have never written before, they're writing their very first thing. And something I hear a lot of first-time authors of any sort, they'll tell you that, oh, maybe they did multiple writing passes, right? I've revised this 4, 5, 6 times, and I did an editorial pass. I edited it once, and so I'd like to just, kind of get that idea out there for authors that in the same way that you have multiple writing passes, you really should think about your editorial side of things as a layered type of event too, right? Because on different editorial passes, you might be more focused on one thing than another. Sometime you might be thinking about the structure of, of this piece, of the narrative itself. Does it tell the story? Does it take the reader where I need him to go? Another time you might be really focused on, the technology that you're talking about in terms of, am I explaining this particular thing, this very detailed thing as best I can? And then there's editorial passes that really are the, the kind of copy editing, oh yeah, and let me make sure that I got the grammar right, that I don't have any typos, things like that. And so I think it's important to think about the editorial process a lot like the writing process, where it truly is a process with multiple passes. And so your focus at different times could very well be different.
Thank you.
I think Adobe really mentioned some key things we should really look for when it comes to editing, but I'm going to take probably something completely tangential to what's being mentioned. And that is, I'm going to say, as an editor, also spend the time developing a relationship with the author. I've had about 4 different editors. Most of my books have been through Pragmatic Programmers. I'm very happy for that. I've had about 4 different editors, and working on a book is really hard, especially when you are sitting there having written, you have to come back and rewrite it. And when the editor puts a comment saying, why do I care? What they actually mean is, what does the reader actually care about this? And it's not unusual to get really angry at the editor at some point because you have spent so much time and effort, and then you're thinking, what part of this don't you get? And then you have to calm down and realize they're not trying to attack you, they're trying to make your book better. And that thought becomes a lot easier if you have a really good relationship with the editor. You know, my wife has this notion. The minute I say, Jackie is calling, she says, I'll talk to you in 4 hours. I'm not even kidding with you, because I literally spend 4 hours on the phone with her at one stretch. And that's the part I love about working with her. We're not talking about the book alone. We talk about so many things, and we have developed this wonderful relationship. And in fact, just now she sent me an email saying, we need to talk. And I'm like, okay, there goes another 4 hours. But I'm really looking forward to it, honestly, because it's not just getting things done. It's knowing that you have an ally with you, working with you on the book. And when she says things to me, I treat it as, well, here's somebody who's looking out for me rather than making things harder on me. I cannot say that enough. That relationship is extremely important to develop for the journey to be pleasant for the author. And I think that eventually shows in the book as well.
It sounds like a wonderful relationship that you have. Anything else before we move on to the next question? Okay, we have a question for you, Rachel, which is, what does writing technical documentation mean for the organizations you mentioned? What is the process and what do you produce?
Wow. Process. I am the process. Well, it's an interesting story. I really wanted to work with the React team, and I knew that, well, they knew that they really needed someone to help clean up React Native's documentation and then rewrite all of React's documentation. So it's a bit of a Cinderella story, because I came and it was like, first, pick all these lentils out of the ashes. First, sew this broken dress back into a gown. It was very, very fun and very interesting. The process generally goes through me, but I do, on the React Native documentation, sometimes have invited experts write guides. My sneaky feeling on this is we have so many smart engineers working on React and React Native internally at the Facebooks. One of our bottlenecks is taking that internal knowledge of how these engines work and porting it to external experts who can then go and do the work of speaking at conferences, writing courses, and becoming community experts, sort of like making a raid of human engineering information, copying it from one person's brain into someone else's. And the engineers at our company they cannot prioritize the same things that people externally can, who would love to write books about these topics and really deeply grok the concepts. So I try to take excited external contributors who are domain experts in things like offline first for app development or animation systems, and I try to pair them with an expert internally as a technical reviewer. And I come in as the reviewer, helps with the outline and the content and skeleton, I am like, give me a skeleton of how you want to approach this. And I'll point out, like, maybe more like this, maybe more like that. And we develop that rapport, which is so valuable to have in an editor. We got to be friends. And then we bring in the technical editor, who starts doing this brain dump and pointing out how things really work under the hood. And the great part is that everyone benefits. You've got the internal engineer learning from how their work is perceived externally. Meanwhile, they're translating and porting all their information over to that external editor. And we're creating a community resource that people can use to teach. And then at the end, it goes through a couple of hand-arounds with any pertinent stakeholders before it becomes a pull request, usually at the original author's discretion, with a little thanks to this person for the initial writing of this documentation. So that's the closest process that I can point at. Did I miss anything in that question?
What do you produce? But I think we know that that's documentation. But maybe if there's anything else?
Well, I also put on a couple of conferences and things, but they aren't directly related to technical writing. So I think I did that one justice. On to the next.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I don't know if anyone else also wants to talk about their process.
I would probably add one thing is, if it's really hard to write about something, that might be a sign of poor design as well. So that gives an opportunity to bring it up to the team or the technical person and say, I'm really struggling to write about it. Do you want to take another pass at it and see if this can be done differently? And I've
So
seen that quite
true.
often.
It just happened with an API React Native put out. I was writing the docs and I'm like, this is an inconsistently named function and property here. It would have been a very different conversation earlier in the API's design, I'm sure.
Yes. Anybody else have anything to add before we move on? Okay, our next question. What is a good balance between text and photos / screenshots in technical writing? Is there a rule to use as a guide?
More
animations. I do always think actually of the React conference that you put on, Rachel, and now I always think of potatoes when I think of React, which was an amazing animation picture diagram of explaining React.
Maggie Appleton gave a great talk at Women of React Conf Online earlier this year about the importance of, well, she basically illustrated React's internals, and she's a very competent illustrator as well as technical writer, and she's collaborated with Dan Abramov on multiple Egghead courses and things. She works for Egghead as like their in-house illustration magician. And it's one of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get from all of our documentation is that please more visuals. And there are people where you can show people a flood of text, or you can show them one diagram, but usually showing the diagram with the text really helps break it down for people who can just grok something by looking at it. And even if people do read the essay, being able to see the picture creates a sort of a shortcut in their brain that just pops all that knowledge back into their RAM, their short-term memory, when they need to just pick right back up on it. But unfortunately, illustrations tend to be put off to the last minute. They tend to not be prioritized early. And there's a misconception amongst writers and engineers that illustrations are easy. This has happened to me before, like, can't you just put us together a drawing in 30 minutes? I'm sure I could do it in Keynote in 5. And it's like, that will take 3 hours and you're going to have to look at the drafts and give feedback. So it's very interesting to incorporate illustration into that process. There's no hard and fast rule of thumb, but whenever you see long, unbroken blocks of text, it's a good indicator that you could be breaking something down, and you could probably add an illustration in there. I'm wondering if other people have guidelines that are a little bit more succinct than mine.
I don't have a guideline necessarily, but I love what you said about engineers often thinking, especially engineers that typically don't have anything to do with illustrations or any sort of design elements, definitely want to put it off to the end and definitely think, well, that's so easy. I can just throw that in at the end. And, having a low quality image, having a low quality illustration, I don't mean like in terms of resolution or anything, but I mean one that doesn't very accurately describe what's going on, can take away from your text so much. So I do think it's extremely important, to be thinking about it early, to be, if it's not something that's kind of in your skill set, your wheelhouse, get some help on it. There's nothing wrong with that, in the same way that a lot of fantastic designers are going to go to engineers and go, I need some help with some sort of functionality. That is their skill set. And it's really, really worth it because, yeah, definitely having illustrations, I think for almost everybody, almost any sort of reader, learner of any sort can really drive a point home. It can make learning faster. And like Rachel said, it's the thing that like flashes back in your mind a lot of times. You remember it. Having a very poorly thought out illustration can really confuse readers and just leave them going over the same passage going, wait, what's happening here? So high quality matters is what I would say.
I'm just nodding my head loads, just agreeing. Anybody have anything else to add?
I just want to add that the illustrations are one of the things that I look at when I'm editing chapters. You definitely do want to make sure that they make sense in terms of explaining the text, because you want them to illustrate what it is that what you're trying to say. And back to what Rachel said about just having these long blocks of text, it can get monotonous, and after a while your eyes will just glaze over because it's nothing but just this constant barrage of information. So visually, you just want to have something that's going to break that. And for the books that we have at Prague, we try to balance out the amount of illustrations that you see in a chapter. So you might have maybe one illustration per 2-page spread, or if it's not an illustration, maybe it might be just an aside that's drawn in a gray box. So visually, it just looks a lot different than what you've already been looking at. So then in terms of the quality of the quality in terms of resolution, it doesn't matter right away that it's a low res image, just as long as you have something, because it means you're thinking about it, and it means that you have the opportunity to improve upon it later. So you don't have to have something that's like final print ready right away, but at least have something there, so we know that it's in progress.
Thank you.
I actually
Anyone
want to give
else?
I wanted to give a shout out. What you just said, Adobe, reminded me. Sometimes I'm dealing with a document and somebody has illustrated something in the source code using ASCII art. And that right there is a prime diagram opportunity. I mean, you don't think of diagrams as illustrations, but they count. And if you are a designer and you're thinking, oh, man, I want to get into technical writing, actually taking some of those concepts and showing them visually is also a great place to get your feet wet. All right, I'm done. No more illustration ideas.
Yeah, I just want to add something else onto that. I've literally had authors draw on a piece of paper, take a picture, and then just put it in the document. And I say, you know what, that's good enough, because I just need to see what it is that you're planning. And then you can work on hiring somebody to fix it up for you later.
Anything else to add? Cool. So the next question. Technical writing is great, but people are becoming more lazy. YouTube is a platform for information. I look at other web pages, but I do follow a few YouTubers. Is that also technical writing in other means? For example, the recording of this webinar, I would not read about it. Thoughts?
Okay, I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, is a video technical writing? I mean, I think that probably in the strictest sense, no. I mean, I guess you could have script writing, right? So it depends on how you're talking about the video. Did you write out a technical script? And then that kind of gets into a gray area. But what I do think that the person's talking about kind of in a larger sense, and I saw it over in the comments too, that people are thinking about this, and this I think is very true, that when you talk about technical writing, really what are you talking about? Technical writing in the sense of writing about technology. You're talking about instructing people, whether that's in documentation, whether that's in a narrative, whatever format it is, it's about conveying some sort of technical information. And there is a very big move on across the industry, to, at least in the publishing industry, to think beyond books, to think beyond the written word. It is the idea of, people tried video at first, now they're trying more interactive shells. Can you be reading the technical content, working in an interactive shell at the same time? what are all the different media that you can mix into the learning experience? And often that is an author doing those things. So then you start to have to ask yourself, well, what is technical writing or writing about technology in that sense, when you're now the author of text for a book, the instructions, you're doing code that's going to run now in an interactive environment, you're scripting out a video, you're recording the video. For me, it becomes part of, I think of it as like kind of technical publishing, in the sense of you as a creator are publishing your information in all these different formats. And I do think that's somewhere that things are heading more, but in the strictest sense, I don't know that I would call a video technical writing, but there is a script to it. It's definitely the bigger sense of, conveying technical information is what I would say.
I would say the challenges are much more enormous when it comes to videos compared to a text-based form. Part of the reason is, if somebody is sitting down to read a text, there's a certain amount of commitment they have in their mind to invest into it. Videos, on the other hand, you really need to grab the audience within the first few seconds, literally. Otherwise, they're going to leave. So, I was talking to a friend of mine who runs a conference and publishes most of the talks from the conferences onto YouTube. And his argument was, for an average speaker, the time the audience spent on the video is under a minute. For an exceptional speaker, it's probably 10 minutes of an hour-long video. So one of the things we have to really deal with today is, time is a huge investment. And when people are watching a video, they want to be engaged every minute even more than when they read a textbook. And so I would say the demands and the challenges are even more than what you invest into a textbook. I don't have an answer for it, but I can certainly point to the problem.
I would say that, oh.
So thank you. So
I was just gonna plow in and say that there's a big difference between unscripted content and scripted content. Egghead.io, for instance, those videos are scripted and they're short. My own courses, also very scripted and very short. You can learn CSS animations on my site in like 3 hours, something like that. Try to go for brevity, because if you've conveyed the concept correctly, it is concise. But many videos that you'll see put up on YouTube on topics can be rambling. It can be a lot to dig through unscripted content to find those nuggets of gold. It's not the same as sitting back and watching someone play StarCraft 2 and learning from their moves. There's a real benefit to scripted content, be it videos, courses, etc. And while, yes, the person asking the question said, I'm watching this panel, I'm not reading about it, all good scripted content comes with, what's that word again? Yes, transcripts, for the people who don't listen, but read.
very good point. Anything else? Okay, but we go on to the half. For those, this is your water break. So go get a mouth. Okay. Hello? Are people still here?
Yep, we're still here.
Zoom just kicked me out and then let me join again. The joys of working from home. Okay. Oh no, I've lost all the questions in my chat. If I didn't get to answer your question, can you please drop them back to me in the chat? Because I could see that there were 12 more questions and they've all just gone. Oh, perfect example of the joys working from home. Cool. I'm starting to get them back in. Sorry about that technical issue. So the next question, how can career changers provide value through technical writing? I have seen a lot of people share their stories, but are there angles that are particularly interesting from a tech editor's perspective?
I'm sorry,
Could I hear that one more time?
Yeah.
Sorry. How can career changers provide value through technical writing? I have seen a lot of people share their stories, but are there angles that are particularly interesting from a tech editor's perspective?
So I'll jump in for one of my observations. Clearly, I'm an author, not a technical editor, but I've had enough editors I've worked with, and you know, one of the things that intrigues me quite often is you want the editor to somewhat play a role of a reader of the content you are creating. So in my opinion, them being too technical is not the most important thing I look for. They need to have enough knowledge of the technical things, but that's not really the most important focus. Are they able to really bring this from a perspective of the, not necessarily a novice, but somebody who's not an expert in that particular area? And what I found to be most useful overall is editors who are reasonably knowledgeable are more effective in the long run for me than editors who are superly knowledgeable in the area. When they are very knowledgeable, they often step on my toe rather than trying to bring my voice and my opinions into it. Versus when they're reasonably knowledgeable, they're able to find problems in my writing, but at the same time, channel me towards being effective to the readers. So I think, you know, not being an expert, but having a diversified knowledge portfolio actually is quite helpful, at least in my observation.
Oh, anyone else?
Yeah, I think that, you know, like Venkat was saying, there's one of the things, if you're thinking about what makes for a good editor, what makes for a good technical editor, you know, editors will tell you that there's many different types of editing, right? So it kind of depends on each type of editor has their own skill set. And often, you know, an editor, well, like Adobe, you know, can do many different types of editing, but editors try to focus on typically on one type of editing at a time. So, you know, like Venkat was saying, you would be looking for a development type of editor. That's exactly what you would be looking for, is that type of, you know, can they guide you through? They don't need to be incredibly knowledgeable about the exact topic that you're writing on, because they really understand content from that structure, from a narrative standpoint and telling a story. You know, whereas a technical editor in a lot of places is far less concerned with that and much more concerned with, you know, the way you're presenting the technology itself. Are you using best practices? Are these industry standards that we're seeing? And they'll call you out on the actual technical part of it. So I think that there's a lot of room, you know, depending on what the person is thinking. And it is another one of those cases where it kind of depends on what type of editing do you want to do, and what type of editor do you want to work with, because there are so many different kinds. And depending on, you know, how large of an organization you're with, there are going to be multiple editors really focusing in on different types of things.
Yeah. If I'm understanding the question correctly, one of the things that you'd have to think about as being a technical editor versus being a technical writer is that you're you'll have to be comfortable with being in the background, because you have to remember that you're working with an author who is trying to get their message out. It's really your book. You're helping them to make this the best book possible, but you have to understand that that's going to be their voice, and the work that you do should not change that voice. The work that you're doing is going to help amplify it. So just be aware that, and sometimes you may get an author that doesn't necessarily give you credit in the book, so your name won't show up anywhere, but shouldn't have been your goal in the first place. Your goal should be, as I said, to amplify what the author is trying to say and help to get it out there so that other people can experience it as well.
Since we're talking about voice, I'm just gonna go on this tangent here. That's a very interesting perspective from an editorial point of view. I know that in my situation, I'm charged with maintaining voice and tone, which means that the voice and tone that I'm trying to get from contributors and that I'm evoking from my own writings have to match the overall repo's voice and tone. And that has to go into style guides that are part of my onboarding for new contributors. And there's the nail whose head sticks up must be edited down kind of approach to that. And I know I have a very bouncy voice and tone when I'm writing my own documentation, but when I wrote my book for A Book Apart, they have their own voice and tone, and I had to actually rein in some of my own aphorisms and effervescence to be more in line with the voice and tone of the other books that they publish. So whether you're an individual contributor or you're maintaining a repo, sometimes you're conforming to someone else's voice and tone, or you are enforcing that voice and tone yourself.
Looks like maybe we lost Kimberly again, but I do see that there's.
I think so.
But I see that there's another question that I would like to answer anyway. That's in the comments where someone said, "So would you say there's a difference between an editor of technical documents and a technical editor of documents?" And I think this is one of those things. Yeah, I mean, my gut instinct is to say yes, because technically, a technical editor refers to a very specific type of work in the same way the copy editor, in the editorial world, that holds certain expectations. So an editor of technical documents could be, in my mind, that would be anyone who works on any part of the editorial process of technical documents, whereas a technical editor, I really do expect, certain things. And it somewhat varies from place to place. At DigitalOcean, where I was a technical editor, there was the concept of definitely trying to make sure that the voice matched what they were doing. But a very large part of what we were doing there was, we had certain subject matters that we were area experts in, and it really was about making sure when you're running through this tutorial, is this industry standards? Is this best practices? So it's not just does the code work? It's like, does this code work? And is this really the best way that we want to put this forward? Does whatever, the community around the technology agree, if it's Python code or whatever it is, that this is, the best approach to it. So yeah, I would say that the technical editor and an editor of technical content are definitely two different things in my mind.
I would also add to what you said, Dave, is it also comes down to the author that you're working with as well. If the author is somebody who is, kind of developing or growing in the industry, you would probably need a fairly strong technical editor. But if the author is a fairly good expert in the field, then that need is diminished, and what you really want is a development editor at that point, because you really need to bring in the structure, not the technical practices, because the author is the so to say, authority in that area possibly. So it really depends on somebody who has that ability to kind of change that dial and be able to serve one way or the other. And also I would say there's a bit of a higher risk in having a single technical editor, because you really want to bring in, at least that's what I try to do when I write books, is probably to an insane degree, is to bring 20 experts to review the book, because I really want them to bring in different technical depth into it, something that one person may not be able to fulfill, whereas one person can probably guide me through the structure of the book. So in addition to having a technical editor, if we're going in that direction, I would rather have more than one than have one to fill in the gaps, in my opinion.
Cool. Anything else to add before we move on to the next question? Cool. Next question. What about technical documentation as a game to gain certification, which is used by medium-sized companies to encourage other techies to know about their platforms?
Writing it, or as an interactive curriculum?
That's a very good question. Whoever asked that, do you want to put more information in the chat? It was asked by Lucky. Ah. Lucky, anything to explain further on that one?
A few years back, Twilio had a really cool, and then they still maybe do, they made an entire game out of working through their documentation. So working through it, you're learning the Twilio API, but along the way you're like unlocking, various power-ups and all. It was almost like a mini RPG type of thing. And so you're building an application, and a lot of times people didn't even necessarily think about it in terms of they were learning how to use the tools. They're just like, oh, this is cool. I want to get to this next thing. I want to get these points, these power-ups, whatever. So they're building these applications. And I always thought it was really smart, because it got people using their API in very interesting ways, totally as a game. And for a while I thought, oh, that's going to be a thing. People are really going to start, it's going to be the gamification of all the docs. And I never really saw it go too many other places, but it was sort of along those lines, not for certification, but just to use, learn to use their tools better.
It encourages the adoption of their platform, where there is a mix between informing and marketing at the same time. I believe the content is scripted, and it's not just Twilio. There is other platforms that are using the same concept. So it is technical writing for marketing in the sense, but they are using the medium of the internet and all its capabilities. Is not just the written form, but as a game with animation, with videos. What do you think about technical writing is just evolving, or then it's being used by other companies just to as a marketing, or more it's informing and marketing, because each there is so many platforms out there, and the adoption of the platform is would mean like a source of revenue for the companies, or other things. So technical writing is the fulfillment of technical writing in general.
Well, okay. That's a really good question. I can say one thing, because I've actually built an interactive site that gets people to use something. DevToolsChallenger.com. Oh, another Mozilla collaboration, this time for Firefox's animation tools. That's not my artwork. I hired an amazing cartoonist in Portland to do all the illustrations. But the idea was that you're on this deep sea expedition, and as you completed tasks with the DevTools, you would unlock fun facts about the deep sea fish. And this is actually, it took 5 weeks and 5 people to come together. I like doing things in a month. So it's like pretty cool. One of the downsides to doing these heavily interactive courses is that they are difficult to edit. Once somebody builds one, it's hard to get the marketing budget to go back and update it with changing APIs and changing interfaces. It's almost like it requires an interaction team to be fully funded and available just to keep the content tooled and primed and ready to go. Additionally, getting backing for such initiatives can be difficult because it is, that link again is devtoolschallenger.com. Just noticing the chat there. I'll be sure to write it down in chat after. But additionally, the getting backing for an initiative like that is kind of a special case because usually it falls somewhere between education/advocacy and marketing. And marketers want to see something different from an initiative like this than an educational platform team would. And so metrics can be misaligned and it can be difficult to get renewed and it's difficult to get recurring funding for something like that, which is why even though it's phenomenally popular, we don't quite, I think, don't quite see it taking over the educational and API documentation world the way you'd think it would.
Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Cool. So we've got 15 minutes left, so we'll try and quickly go through the rest of the questions. After I did get kicked out, if your questions haven't got answered yet, do drop them to me because I did lose them. So the next question, would you say there is a difference between an editor of technical documents and a technical editor of documents? So an editor of tech.
We've done that one, Kimberly.
Oh, have we done that one?
Yeah,
okay,
that's when you came back in.
Perfect. Okay, I can ignore that then. Okay. Okay, oh, here's a good one. How do you write a proposal to a publisher? Should you have a finished book or one chapter or just an idea?
I'm probably going to get, oops, sorry.
No, please, Venkat, go.
I was going to say, you're probably going to get as many different responses as the number of people here. And I'll just share with you my experience, and by no means am I saying that's the right approach. I'm one of those weird people. I write my books in 2 weeks. And what I normally say is I spend 2 years thinking about a concept in my mind, and then I cram through it in about 2 weeks and come up with a first draft of the book, which is definitely not in any form that's readable or publishable, but that gives me a really good idea of what I really want in this book. And oftentimes I go with that as my proposal. And once I submit that and say, here's the book I'm writing, obviously it needs to be rewritten from this form, and then fill in other details the publisher wants. But oftentimes that gives me a lot of confidence in my own mind for two things. One is that it gives me confidence that I know what the focus of the book really is. And I think it also helps the publisher with one challenge, which is signing up books is one part, but having the author finish the book is completely a different story. And if you have taken the time to come up with the first draft, however, incomplete it may be, it sends a message to the publisher that you are actually more likely to finish the book. And I really don't want to spend time on a book I would not finish. So that's kind of the way I approach. And I always tell authors, write as much as you can before you go to the publisher, because you're telling yourself that you're really serious about it. I know a lot of authors who never completed books more so than authors who actually completed. That's one of the reasons I kind of self-impose that mode of operation, but certainly that's not the best way or the only way to do it.
Thank you.
And yeah, I would say that I agree with what Venkat said, that probably you will get a different answer from everybody about this. And it's true. I think if you were to ask, so if you're talking publishers, and whether that's book publisher or whatever it is, but someone who actually publishes other people's content, I think they're all going to have a different answer. I think that you can probably find a publisher who will ask you to do anything from write as little as possible to write as much as possible. So I don't know that if you're looking at it from the publisher's perspective, it's really going to depend on the publisher. I'll tell you from an editorial perspective, one of the things that terrifies editors a lot of times is when you get a proposal for a complete manuscript and the author says, I'm done with it, it just needs a couple things. Do you want to look at this? Because from an editorial perspective, you're always sitting there going, oh no, you are so far from done with this. And so it's terrifying to think of the author that's coming to you with 450 pages going, it's done. If you could just give it a quick read and publish it, we're good. You know, and you're like, no, that's not true. So, you know, there's somewhere in there's a balance of, there are the authors that can, you know, and I think they probably tend to be, if you're talking books, they're people, you know, that have written 12 books. They have a very good sense of what it takes. And so when they come to you with a manuscript, you're like, yeah, okay, you know, this is good. We can go from here. I think that for a lot of first-time authors, I would actually say it's the opposite. I would say for them, it's probably better to come with a bit less, because you're going to most likely need someone, a development editor, or possibly if it's a book publishing company, an acquisitions editor, someone who is able to look at the book you're proposing, look at the idea you're proposing, go, okay, does this table of contents make sense? Does this topic make sense? You know, you come with an outline, you kind of say like, this is the way I'm going to present the book, the information, the material, this is my audience. I think it probably makes more sense for those first-time authors to do it that way, to come with a little bit less and work through the process, because most publishing companies will, you know, you will start working with an acquisitions editor right away, and they want to see you succeed. So they're going to give you feedback and go, okay, you know, we like the idea. This is probably something we publish on. You know, think about redoing it this way, and they kind of work with you to get to the proposal that you want. So now I'm speaking just for PragProg, and to say, you know, if you would like to write with us, come with even your earliest stage idea. Come with, you know, when you're just like, I want to write a book about JavaScript, send us an email, because what we will do is we will put you in touch with one of our acquisitions people, and they'll work with you to figure out what makes sense, what's a good fit for you, what's a topic, and you'll have someone to work with kind of even before you start writing the manuscript.
Thank you. So yeah, if anyone is thinking of writing a book, drop Dave an email.
Yeah, I've worked with many different authors in a couple of different houses, so they've had different requirements. I know someone who's written, up till right now, 116 books. So if he wanted to just write a whole book right now and just drop it off and say it's done, he can do that, because he knows what's required. He knows how to speak to his audience. There's nothing else that would need to happen except maybe a copy edit. But I've had an author recently who wrote a whole book. He hadn't had it published anywhere before. And it wasn't as simple as just saying, okay, you're done. We can just work out some copy edits and we can publish this. It didn't fit the house style as far as the voice or the approach. So we had to go through each chapter one by one and basically rewrite the whole thing. So if you're going to present a whole book, at least be familiar with what the house style is, what their approach is, and get familiar with other books that come out of that house. You know, if you see how those books are written, then you can at least present something, maybe a short chapter, a couple of chapters, whatever you're able to put down at the moment, and then submit it and see what happens. And if they like what you have, then you know you'll be brought in and you can be assigned an editor to work with. But if it doesn't work for this particular house, then that's fine. There are other people that you can try presenting it to as well. You don't have to give up just because one house says, you know, this doesn't work for us.
Thank you. Any other tips before we move on to the next question? Okay, next question. How do I overcome imposter syndrome? Which is a very broad and big topic, but yes, anyone want to take the floor?
I'm going to say spending enough time with very smart people really makes me realize two things. One is there are people who know so much, and then those very people also don't know so much. So I don't really, I'll be honest about it, I never have imposter syndrome at all. And the reason is I don't pretend that I somehow am entitled and I know things. I'm just absolutely the same person as I was 20 years ago, struggling every day. Getting up in the morning is a struggle. I have to learn every day. I have to convince my children to listen every day. So having a good family and friends completely cures it for me. I never have that illusion of somehow I'm really great. It's quite the opposite. It's struggle every day, and we all try to accomplish. And there are people who are doing, brilliant work with much less and much more. So I think it's really spending more time with other people really keeps me on the ground. So that's basically what it is for me is every day realizing that we're not special at all. I don't think there's anybody who is actually special. We are all, every one of us has struggles every day to deal with.
Thank you.
I can definitely back that up. I'm a big believer that there's no such thing as geniuses, that what we call genius is really just a confluence of lucky chances and the right environment for the person who is curious about the right thing. And maybe there are some genetic underlying things in some people somewhere, but half the time we would never know because those people wouldn't be in the right situation, in the right confluence of events for their predispositions to actually make a difference in the quantum foam that is humanity. So everyone out there has the potential to be the next Dan Abramov if they just happen to fall in love with the right UI library at the right time when it needed the right number of contributors and there was still low-hanging fruit to work on. I work with so many really smart engineers who've been at their jobs for 10 years. And me, I feel like such a baby in comparison to them, but none of them can draw an illustration the way I can. None of them have built communities that I have. Every one of us has something that we do that makes the people around us stronger, that they admire us for. And if you struggle to see that about yourself, one thing that always gets me into a good growth mindset is to try teaching someone who doesn't know quite as much as I do about the thing I feel intimidated about. There's always someone who doesn't know as much as you do, even at the very outset. Like if you know just the fundamentals of something, you could teach a child or your spouse who has no interest in that, or a friend at the library, try to explain it to them. And then you'll realize that you know something and you're communicating it to them, and that's valuable. And maybe you don't have 10 years experience yet, but there's nothing stopping you from picking up more and more information and explaining it to more and more people. You just have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Again, just nodding along to everything there. Anything else anybody has to add?
I think a lot of times when you ask people, if you really start to ask them about like, why do they feel imposter syndrome? It's a lot like, when you look at people, we all talk about this all the time now, right? That you see people on social media and all you're getting are the little highlights of their life, right? So you're looking at going, these people have this fantastic life. There's all this stuff going on. And why isn't this me? And you're thinking about, I got up and I did laundry and I stubbed my toe and whatever else. And they're over there like on fabulous vacation after, one after another. And I think that for writing, I think that for software developers, I think a lot of times it's that same thing. Because you're not seeing the day-to-day, like you said, Venkat, the day-to-day struggle, right? You're not seeing that. You're seeing these finished products. You're seeing this code that came out looking fantastic. You don't know about however many revisions, however many problems it went through. You're seeing like, wow, look what they just produced. you're looking at the book that someone wrote, going, look at this career, look at all this stuff. Because again, you're not seeing all of that. And I think that a lot of times that's really where it's coming from. It's that you're seeing the finished, polished product at the end, and it makes it hard. It can make anybody feel intimidated, you know, because it feels to you, it did just spring forth, right? To you, suddenly there is this incredible thing, but it wasn't like that for the person doing it. And, you know, so I think sometimes just having the chance to hear other people talk about their experience and all the problems along the way, you know, that can be one way to get over it, is to realize, you know, that no one's really just waking up one day with any of this stuff perfect. It's they're waking up and they're putting in an awful lot of work to get to whatever it is you're seeing, feeling like you can't do. You can get there, you know, and it's just probably going to take you as much work, or, you know, maybe in different areas, but it won't be easy, but you can get there. We all can. So.
Thank you.
And I just want to say really quickly that you don't always see yourself the same way other people see you. So you may not think that you're that great at some particular thing, but then you might get a text or an email or something say, hey, can you help me with this thing? So that person who's texting you believes you have the knowledge that they need. So you have to look at that part of it and just see that other people depend on you for something. Other people are asking you these questions because they believe that you are the one who can help them with it. So look at it in that sense. Don't just look at what you think you're lacking. Think about what you actually do know and what people are coming to you for. So you just realize that you have that, you know, that thing, whatever it is that people want from you.
That's really nice. Anything else to add? Okay, we do have a few more questions, but I'm also conscious that we are coming now to the end, and I don't want to keep our panelists any longer because you've already given up, you know, enough time to be on this panel. So thank you so much. It's really, really sorry if your question didn't get answered. Maybe we'll do this again if there's a few more questions, but thank you so much to our panelists. Again, some really great advice that came through there. I hope people found that really useful. If you've got any other questions about, you know, technical writing, if there is a question that maybe you've got for one of our panelists in particular that we didn't get answered, drop me an email, kimberly@codebar.io. Kimberly is L-E-Y, not L-Y. And I will try and pass it on to that panelist, and we will try and get it answered afterwards. We have recorded this, so it will go up onto our YouTube. I know there are a few people who didn't get to, and then if there is something that you want to go back and look at, then you can. But otherwise, thank you so much, and enjoy either the rest of your evening or day for people that are in America. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'll hang around while people leave. So
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
thank you so
Very
much.
much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.